Alright, here in this video we continue our discussion of ARC section 80 as it relates to compilation engagements. And for this particular video we will discuss acceptance and continuance of client relationships and compilation engagements. So acceptance of an engagement or client's relationship would be a new engagement that we want to bring on, or a new client. And continuance would mean that we've performed this engagement maybe in a prior period, but we're deciding whether we want to continue doing that engagement or not. So first here we see that as a condition for accepting the engagement, we first need to comply with ARC section 60A.26, and we've done a prior video on that, so you can go to that video if you want, but it basically explains that we need to make sure that we comply with our ethical requirements and that the financial reporting framework that management uses in their financial statements is appropriate, and that management is responsible for, or management acknowledges that it's responsible for the selecting the appropriate financial reporting framework, for detecting and preventing fraud, for maintaining and implementing appropriate internal controls, and also in our engagement, providing us all of the information that we need in order to perform our engagement. So in addition to those requirements that are at ARC section 68.26, which you can go to and review if you would like, we have another video for that. They need to comply with these particular requirements as well, or rather they need to acknowledge that they understand their responsibility for these things. At first, that is the preparation of fair presentation of the financial statements in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework. So that could be GAAP, which would be a general purpose framework, or special purpose framework, which could be a cash basis, a regulatory basis, tax basis, something that is specific for a specific financial statement user rather than a general user, which would be appropriate for GAAP. So management is responsible for, or they should acknowledge that they're responsible for the fair presentation of financial statements. And that's usually done by their signing of an engagement letter that we prepare that includes these particular disclosures saying that they acknowledge and understand their responsibility for these. So in addition, if the financial reporting framework that's used by management is a special purpose framework, then management needs to acknowledge and understand its responsibility to provide the following disclosures in their financial statements to help the users understand the differences between a special purpose framework and GAAP. And so for purposes of this section we're going through right here, this isn't saying that management has a requirement to do these things in the footnotes. That'll be discussed later. What we're saying here is that in our engagement letter, management needs to acknowledge and understand its responsibility to provide these items in its financial statements once we finally issue them. So if they use a special purpose framework, they'll need to describe how it differs from GAAP, what are the significant accounting policies related to that special purpose framework, and also disclosures that might be similar to GAAP. Next thing they need to acknowledge their responsibility for providing in the financial statements is a description of any significant interpretations of a contract if they're using the contractual basis of accounting. And they also need to acknowledge that they will acknowledge their responsibility to include disclosures beyond those specifically required by the framework that may be necessary for these users to understand the financial statements, which will make them have a fair presentation. And then finally, in the engagement letter, the management or those charged with governance or management needs to acknowledge its responsibility for including the compilation report in any document that contains the financial statements. So in summary, management needs to acknowledge its responsibility for the items that are included in ARC section 68.26, and also its responsibility for the fair presentation of the financial statements, and also to include the compilation report and anything that contains the financial statements. And so if management is not able to acknowledge its responsibility for these items or refuses to accept responsibility for them, then we need to discuss that matter with management or those charged with governance. And if they're unable to make changes that are acceptable to us, then we should not accept that engagement.